Oh, that's a great idea. Well, that might be a good idea. What the? Okay, so I guess I'm gonna make pencil holders today because can't find them. So for this first pencil holder, it's going to be a dice-shaped pencil holder. So I need 6 3.5-inch mitered sides to put this thing together. And I'm going to get that out of this big piece of sapele here. And yes, you did hear me right. I said first pencil holder. That's because I'm going to make this a 3 pencil holder build video. So we're going to make 3 different types of pencil holders out of basically scrap wood. Alright, so I have all 6 sides of my dice cut out. Before I go gluing them together, I need to take the top piece and cut holes in it. So I'm going to use my dice stencil to mark where my holes are supposed to go. These stencils, I made these myself. They're 3D printed. They have a small little hole for marking where to drill your holes through your pieces when you're doing a dice. I also have these stencils, which these are paint stencils. They're the same thing, but the holes are the right size for painting. Where these here, these stencils just mark where you drill your holes at whenever you're drilling your holes out. I have both sets of stencils for sale on my website, and also if you have 3D printing capabilities, I have the STL files for sale over there as well. Just like that, they're marked, and then I'm ready to drill my holes right through the marks. And then after everything's glued up and sanded and everything, then I will use the other stencils to mark the other 5 sides with paint. Now for a 3.5-inch dice, the accurate dimensions for these holes should be about 1/2 inch. So that's what I'm going with, is a 1/2-inch Forstner bit. Fortunately, that's a really good size for your pens with a thicker grip on them, and even your Sharpie pens. They fit in there nice and freely. The Forstner bits do a pretty good job of giving me a clean cut, but they're not immune to tear out in the back, so that's why I use a backer board underneath this to try to prevent tear out. So that went good. They turned out well, other than a slight bit of tear out I experienced on the bottom. Well, I shouldn't say slight bit, that's a pretty good chunk there and there. But this is all going to be sealed up inside, and I don't think anybody's going to fit a finger in there to be able to feel it. You can't get an eye in there to be able to see it. So I'm not going to worry about it, as long as you guys don't tell on me about it. So yeah, if that can be our little secret, I don't think anybody will ever know. Let's move on. All right, so another thing we're going to run into when we glue this thing together is we're not going to be able to reach the insides of this box. So I won't be able to finish this once it's together, and I still want the inside to be protected just in case some mishap happens and it gets wet. So what I'm going to do right now is take a little bit of teak oil and a paper towel and rub some teak oil on the inside here, but being very careful not to get it on the miters, because if it gets on there, then when we go to glue this thing together, if there's teak oil in here, then the glue won't penetrate the wood and give us a stronger joint. So yeah, we got to avoid these at all costs while getting the whole inside coated. So this should be fun. Now this stuff, you normally put a liberal amount of it on the surface, basically letting it free flow almost. And then you go back and you wipe it off after about 10 minutes. That basically, that free flow makes sure it gets plenty of penetration But because we have to be so careful not to get any of it over the edges, we're not going to be free flowing much here. Alright, so I'm going to let them dry out a bit before I go gluing them up. So for now, I'm going to start working on the next one, which is what I got all this scrap wood for. That might be a bit much wood, but this is what we're going to work with, and we're going to make a kind of like a Lincoln Logs tower kind of setup thing, except for it's going to have like breathers between all the pieces of wood. You'll understand when it all starts coming together. Let's get to it. Alright, to start this one off, I'm going to run these strips of scrap wood through the drum sander. I'm running them down to 1/8 of an inch thick. With me running them that thin, I thought it was wiser to use the drum sander rather than using the planer. Otherwise, you could use the planer for this. It's just when you get that thin, sometimes they break apart in a planer and start throwing pieces everywhere. So I'll use the drum sander for this instead. Now with this project, if you're doing this project yourself, you don't need to run these strips that thin. You can make them 1/4 inch or even 3/8 of an inch or even 1/2 an inch if you want. It might look slightly different in the end. But then from there, after I got them all to a uniform thickness, I took them over to the table saw and I cut them all down to be 3/4 of an inch wide. Then I took all of those strips and I chopped them up into pieces that are 3 1/4 inches long. And the reason I went with 3 1/4 inches is because the square is going to be 4 inches. So these things are going to lay around that square with the length of the piece going down one side, joining the width of the piece that starts the next side. Alright, so here's all my pieces that I cut out for the next one, which is probably way too many. I could probably do about 2 or 3 of these. So we'll probably make 2 or 3 of these. But anyway, there's 2 trains of thought here. I can sort all these out into the different types of wood and color and da-da-da-da-da. But I think I'm going to go with option number 2, which is now when I pick out of this, it should be pretty well randomized, right? Let's go. And now it's time to start the process of gluing and pinning this thing together. In the end, the glue is what's going to give this whole thing its strength, but the pin nails are what holds it together during the process of gluing it all up. But let me speed this up for you because this takes a little bit of time. There's 2 ways you can go about laying all of these out. One, you can make all of your edges nice and smooth and perfect and seamless. Or you can do what I'm doing here is I'm making everything just slightly offset, a little bit rough textured to it. So in the end, the way I'm doing it, it should have a little bit of a rustic, rough look to it. But I do think a version of this where you make everything join together nice and tightly and then sand the whole sides nice and smooth, I think that would end up looking pretty good too. And there we have it. Now we'll let that dry. Now that the teak oil has had time to dry, it is time to glue up the dice-shaped pencil holder. I have found that whenever gluing up boxes like this, the best clamps in the world is just a roll of blue painter's tape. I've tried so many different types of corner clamps and box clamps from everywhere you can think of to buy them, and nothing has ever worked better than a blue painter's tape. So this is my go-to every time now. Just slather some glue in there and tape it together and it'll work out great. And now we'll let that dry a while just like that. Alright, so while those 2 are drying, I'm going to grab another piece of wood and get to work on a 3rd one. And this one, I'm going to add a little extra feature to it. Let's get to it. This board has a little bit of a crown to it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop it up, then I'm going to run it through the milling process to take that crown away. And then we'll get to work on it. The final dimensions I'm going for here is 4 inches by 4 inches by 6 inches wide. So I'm going to chop accordingly. So I'll cut out all 4 sides and a top and then make sure they fit together nice and neatly. So before I go getting ahead of myself and gluing things together, I need to figure out where this pencil sharpener needs to go on the bottom of this top. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm marking out where that's going to go and where to drill my hole. I need to drill the actual hole from the top, so I'm going to do a little tiny thin pilot hole from the bottom, and then I'm going to use the Forstner bit from the top to bring that hole down through the top. This is just in case we end up with a little bit of tear out as we drill through. That way it's on the bottom where it can be hidden away. Then I'm going to use a router with a chamfer bit to put a little bit of a bevel around that hole to add some prettiness to that hole. Then I'll do all of the same stuff for a hole in the pencil side of the box. Then after doing the same thing with putting teak oil on the insides of the box where we won't be able to reach it later, trying to avoid all the spots where we would glue, it is time to glue this box together. Now I did end up cutting out another two pieces, and what these two pieces does is it creates a divider between the pencil box and the area for the pencil sharpener, and it also creates a bottom for the pencil box. So I glued them in place and then used some pin nails to hold them there while the glue took hold. I use pin nails because they leave very little to no marks behind whenever you nail them into the wood. Then from there I use some CA glue with some activator spray to get this pencil sharpener to stick to the bottom of the top of the box there in alignment with that hole that's through the top of the box for the pencil sharpener. So while I let that all dry out and let the glues all take hold, I'll move on to the dice where we'll start painting some numbers on. Now what I'm using here is my 3D printed paint stencils for a 3.5 inch dice. It's designed specifically to be able to cut 4x4s into cubes so that you can turn them into dice. They have a little bit of weight to them so that the weight to them kind of holds them firmly to your piece so that it don't flop around like regular thin plastic stencils that you get online. So while I let the paint dry on those numbers, I'm going to go and start working on the other pencil holders, starting with the stacked wood pencil holder where I'm going to spray a couple coats of lacquer on it. The pencil holder with the sharpener that's built into it, that one is ready for sanding. So I'm just going to sand that down, get it nice and smooth, get it down to 220 grit sandpaper. We'll do a water pop and then we'll hit it with the 220 again, and then we'll go ahead and start slapping some teak oil on it. With this stuff you want to put it on nice and thick, have it like glistening wet the whole way around, and then you go back about 10 to 15 minutes later with a shop rag and then just wipe all of the excess off. And then you can do that about 2 or 3 times if you would like. This is really good stuff to use on exterior pieces too. Then I'll use the same stuff the same way on the dice, except for when I get to the number 6, I have to use Q-tips to get inside the holes of the number 6 to make sure I get into all those nooks and crannies. And one thing I did start to notice here was that the teak oil did not seem to be agreeing with the paint that I used. It started to fade it and even wipe it off a little bit. I don't know if that's because I didn't let it dry long enough or if it's because they just simply don't mix. So what I ended up doing was going back over it with the drilling stencils instead of the paint stencils, marking it out, and then I just drilled some indentations for all the numbers instead of having paint. And the indentations didn't go the whole way through the wood, so we didn't have these extra holes in there. It's just indentations for all of the numbers. But as I did this, I made sure to drill a pilot hole with a smaller drill bit. That way the bigger drill bit didn't go walking across the face of the piece when I started trying to drill right in that exact spot, because that would cause some problems for me. So the pilot hole was crucial. But honestly, I really like how this was turning out, and I think it should have been the plan all along. So it was a happy mistake, I guess. But after that's done, it's a good idea to go back over it with a little bit of sandpaper and then touch it back up with the teak oil again to make sure all of those holes have teak oil in them. And this is how it turned out. I think the painted numbers look great, but I really like the drilled in numbers. I think this should have been the plan all along. I'm kind of glad that mistake happened, because it was a happy mistake, because the results are great with these drilled out numbers. And this is how the one with the pencil sharpener in it turned out. I think it's a really classy yet functional pencil holder, and it just looks great. And this one is the stacked pencil holder. It's really simple, but yet looks really good. But that is it for this video. If you enjoyed the build, do me a favor and hit that like button. If you want to see more builds like this, hit the subscribe button. I've got a lot of other content on the channel, so go check that out too. Also, in the description below, I will have links to all my tooling and materials used for this build. So if you want to see those affiliate links in the description below, go ahead and check them out too. But until next time, get in that shop and make something awesome.